I'm Julie James, Vice President of the Filson Historical Society. Thank you all so much for being here for tonight's lecture. So without further ado, I'm going to tell you about Paul Patton. He served as our 59th governor of Kentucky from 1995 to 2003. He graduated from the University of Kentucky in 1959 with a degree in mechanical engineering. After 20 years in the coal business, he began his public service career as Deputy Secretary of Transportation in 1979. He was elected Judge Executive of Pike County in 1981, establishing the first countywide garbage collection program, initiating oil recycling, and establishing a work program for welfare moms in daycare centers. He was reelected and served until 1991. When he was elected Lieutenant Governor and named Secretary of Economic Development, becoming the first Lieutenant Governor to serve as an appointed Cabinet Secretary. He was elected Governor in 1995 and reelected in 1999, the first governor in Kentucky elected to a second consecutive term in over 200 years. Jerry Suchanek, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly, is the senior oral historian for the Louis B. Nunn for Oral History at the University of Kentucky and author of Star Spangled Hearts, American Women Veterans of World War II, and Time on Target, the World War II Memorial of William R. Buster. Jerry Suchanek will give a little background on how the book came to be, and then we'll turn the mic over to Governor Patton. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we join me in welcoming Governor Patton and Jerry Suchanek. Thank you.
I thank all of you for coming here in person with the threatening weather, and those of you who are streaming this online, I appreciate your attendance as well. If this were a boxing match, I would be the lightweight on the undercard. As you noticed on the book, it's Paul E. Patton, and need almost a magnifying glass to see my name, but that's who I am. I'm Jeffrey Suchanek. I'm the oral historian at the Louis B. Nunn Center for Oral History at the University of Kentucky. I've been there for 35 years and I've conducted over 2,000 interviews myself. The program itself, the Nunn Center, has been in existence since 1973. And since that time, we've added over almost 19,000 interviews to the collection. So it's one of the larger collections and one of the better well-known programs in the country. And I've been blessed and very proud to work there. As I mentioned, the program started in 1973. There's over 170 individual projects that go into those 19,000 interviews. We have a long tradition of particular strengths in the collection. It include Appalachian history, Kentucky history and agriculture, family farms, the bourbon industry, coal and horse industries, 20th century Kentucky history, the University of Kentucky history, diversity and gender are our strengths, African-American history, the civil rights movement, education, healthcare, politics, and public policy. And my particular strengths are military history, politics, public policy, women's history, and university history. So I've got a lot of balls in the air. Keeps it very interesting for me doing different topics. One of the long traditions in the Nunn Center is to interview former governors. And we have interviews going back to Happy Chandler, Earl Clements, Lawrence Weatherby, Burt Combs, Ned Breathitt, Louis Nunn, Wendell Ford, Julian Carroll, John Y. Brown Jr., Brereton Jones, of course, Paul Patton, and I'm currently interviewing Steve Beshear. And if I hang around long enough, I'm sure I'll probably be interviewing his son, Andy, at some point. As far as the Paul Patton project went, I had no idea it would take us 4 years and over 125 interview hours to complete that project. And when you think about that, We started in September of 2014, and we finished the project in September of 2018. It took us as long to do those interviews as it did Paul Patton in his first entire administration. So we were at it quite a bit, and I'm sure Governor Patton thought it would never end. But he had a lot to say. Once we completed the project, during the project, we would mention, this might make a book someday, but we never really seriously discussed it. And so after the interviews were completed in September of 2018, the interviews just sat in our collection for about a year and a half, 2 years. And one day my phone rang and I looked at it and it was Paul Patton. And I said, "Governor, how are you?" And he says, "Jeffrey, let's do that book." I said, "Well, that's great. But before we do the book, these need to be transcribed. Without transcripts, you have nothing to work with." And so he said, "Well, how much is it going to cost to transcribe those things?" I said, "Well, we've got 125 interview hours." And I gave it to our numbers people. They came up with a total, and Governor Patton and his former chief of staff, Skipper Martin, stepped to the plate and said, "Don't worry about it. We'll raise the money." And by golly, they did. And once we had those interviews transcribed, we had over 3,000 pages of raw transcript. And Governor Patton said, "Well, why don't we just publish those?" And I said, "Well, I don't think the University Press of Kentucky is going to publish a 3,000 page book. We need to whittle this down a little bit." And it took us about three years to take those raw transcripts and make it into a first person narrative. And believe me, when I was doing the interviews, over 50 trips to Pikeville from Lexington, I know every pothole and every crack in the mountain parkway. The people at McDonald's at the Stanton McDonald's exit, they know me by name. It was a time consuming, a 3-hour drive back, 3-hour drive, 3-hour interview and a 3-hour drive back. Those were long days. And to finally have the 3,000 pages of raw transcript and thinking as arduous as doing the interviews and doing those trips, whittling those down into about a 250 to 300 page book was even a harder task. And we just sort of put our shoulder to the wheel and were able to do that. And as a result, we came up with this book. And I think there's a lot of information in here that will be useful to people who are interested in politics and public policy and Governor Patton's personal life, and people interested in coal mining and business. It's chock full of information. I can't tell you how much useful information we weren't able to include in this. It was a very painful process to go through and decide what to keep in and what to keep out. But I'm very proud of this final product, and I hope you are too. And now the undercard's going to turn it over to the main event, the person you really came to hear, and that's Governor Paul Patton.
Thank you, Jeffrey, and thank you all for inviting me tonight. I am vaguely familiar with the Filson Society, and I know you've done a lot of work over the years to preserve the history of Kentucky, and I appreciate that. I want to introduce my son, Chris, which is where right now. Where'd Chris go to? He's doing some work. He's going out, and Jeff talked about my chief of staff, Skipper Martin. Where's he at there? Skipper Martin. Chief of staff for 8 years. He got me elected governor. He was a campaign manager. And how I got to be governor is about the most unlikely thing that you'd ever imagine. One, I'm from Eastern Kentucky. And some people in Eastern Kentucky maybe not as up to par with everybody else. And says that gives you a little thing to think about. And of course, I was in the coal industry for 20 years, and coal industry people don't have the best reputation in the world. Some of them, like they're not as quite as preservative of the environment and their people as they should be. And then I was the county judge in Eastern Kentucky for 10 years. And, you know, county judges, particularly in Eastern Kentucky, don't have the strongest reputation in the world. And then I wasn't from a media center of Kentucky like you would normally think you had to be. So that's a long story. Skipper and I were taking some guys to a U of L football game in Memphis I was lieutenant governor about 1991 or something like that. And one of the staff members said, how did you get into politics? And there's my son coming and sneaking in the back door right now. He said, how'd you get into politics? And we were about Elizabethtown, getting ready to turn on to I-65. And I started talking and we got out to the outskirts of Memphis. I quit talking. He said, I ain't going to never ask him that question again. So me talking an hour is not going to be a big problem. But if you ask some questions that you're interested in, that will make it a lot more, go a lot better. And if you want to interrupt me, don't worry about it. If you're thinking something you want to say, just stand up and I'll recognize you. So with that, you all are historians, and I've studied history a little bit, and I'm pretty cognizant of history. And you know, I think the Civil War, and this is not in the book, hurt Kentucky more than practically any other state. Now, the other states that lost, the South, they lost, but they were united. And Kentucky was divided. You know, these governors run around with these people that's got a pistol on their hip and got little things they talk into and everything, got them dark glasses and everything, keep getting assassinated. You know how many people, how many governors in office have been assassinated in the United States in the last 250 years? One. Goebel in Kentucky, because of a dispute that had its origins in the Civil War. The same, you've heard of the Hatfield-McCoy feud, same thing. And what happened after the before the Civil War, we were a progressive state on the forefront of a country getting ready to explode into the West. You know, the Catholic Church was centered in Baltimore. And so they decided to have more dioceses. And so they established one in Boston and one in New York and one in Philadelphia and one in Bardstown, Kentucky. Because we were the center of commerce in the Western United States. When commerce was going up and down the Ohio River to New Orleans, they had to stop at Louisville. They had to unload and carry their cargo around the falls. And so, you know, in 1850, Louisville was as large as Chicago. And then the whale hub moved to Chicago and caused their growth. You know, in 1950, Louisville was as large as Atlanta. And you know, about that time, you historians know this better than I do, there was debate in Kentucky about establishing a great big regional airport out near the Shelbyville somewhere. But Kentuckians couldn't agree to do that. So they did it in Atlanta. And that made the difference. Atlanta became the air transportation hub of the central United States. So we could not, after the Civil War, we couldn't unite behind education. You know, Transylvania, was the Harvard of the West. Thomas Jefferson wrote a letter to somebody and said, it's a shame that the gentry of Kentucky has to send their children west of the Alleghenies to get a decent education at Transylvania. And so he started the University of Virginia. So we couldn't, so we were divided. We couldn't get behind education. And so from being one of the leaders of education before the Civil War, we got down to where, thank God for Mississippi and Alabama. That was about where we ended up. Now, let me say that we've made some progress. Our Kentucky Education Reform Act, I believe, is the most important piece of legislation in Kentucky in my lifetime. Now, I think our Higher Education Improvement Act was the second most important, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But we couldn't get behind the infrastructure. We let our road infrastructure fall behind, and we fell behind. We made progress. I think we made substantial progress. I think maybe over the last 10 years, we've maybe slowed down a little bit. But let's get down to me being governor. Now, as I said, the most important thing that I did as governor was lead the legislature to match the reforms of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, the CARA, was a important foundation. But you can't live in a foundation. In today's world, it's the higher education where you build the intellectual knowledge that it takes to grow and expand an economy. And so when I became governor, my dad in earlier years was a school teacher in a one-room schoolhouse in Louisiana for about 12 years. He finally ended up being a registered surveyor. He educated himself, but he emphasized education to us. And the schools of Eastern Kentucky at that time weren't particularly highly regarded, but I got a good education. And came to the University of Kentucky. There are very few people from Louisiana High School went to UK. Most of them went to Moorhead. And my the year before me, a couple of my friends from Louisiana went to UK. In the first semester, they came back and said, boy, don't me and my buddy was going to go to UK to be engineers. And he said, you can't go to UK. You're from Louisiana. You can't make it at UK. They scared us to death. That first semester, we didn't do anything but study. We didn't go to ball games. We didn't date girls. We just studied. I made a 3.75, and I said, it's not really all that hard. And then we joined a fraternity, and we had a little, but never did make another 3.75. But I got through, and I got a good practical education. And I married a girl from UK and from Floyd County, and her father was in the coal business, and he didn't want his daughter and granddaughter to head to Detroit for an automobile mechanical engineer's job. And so he said, if you'll come to work for me, I'll teach you the coal business, and you can make a living. And so we did, and spent 20 years there. At 42, I had made enough money to support my family, and I didn't want to own the world. And just a series of things that happened that I ended up being governor of Kentucky. But I had a lot of good people. The first thing we did, Skipper and I, when the morning after the election, if you remember, I was running against Larry Forgy. The Democrats had been governor, the Democrats had had the governorship for 24 years. It was time for a change. Larry Forgy was a brilliant orator. He'd been groomed by the Republican Party to win the governorship. He worked for Governor Louis Nunn. He was the chief of staff, I think, for Louis Nunn. Great orator, golden voice. We just simply outworked him. He should have won, but we won by about 22,000 votes. And so the next morning, skipper came up. I was at the lieutenant governor's house, and he came up and he came in. I said, now what we're going to do? So we had not spent any time figuring out what our agenda would be other than what we politicked on. And our campaign was jobs, jobs, jobs. As the lady said, I was secretary of the Economic Development Cabinet under Governor Jones for about 16, 18 months. And that's the best job in government. Bringing jobs to a community is very well received. And as secretary, you have to entertain a lot of people that might be interested in Indiana, or they might be interested in Tennessee or Alabama or Kentucky, and they'll ask the Cabinet for Economic Development, give me 3 sites in Kentucky that's got at least 100 acres and 1 million gallons of water and natural gas. They'll get out their criteria and close to an interstate and close to an airport, and they'll do the same thing in Ohio and Tennessee. And then they may come in and they don't want anybody to know that they're getting ready to expand somewhere else. So they'll come in incognito, and maybe we'll take them around to a community and show them the community. And the community has to have certain things. They have to have a business park. It has to be fully developed. They've got to have a trained workforce. They've got to have these things. And these people are going to look at 3, 4, 5 different communities, and they're just going to pick one. And so I started saying, you know, this is what you as a community, I started traveling the state. This is what you need to do for economic development to get jobs. But you got to be prepared for disappointment, because you got to kiss. So, you know, you got to kiss a lot of frogs to find a prince. Well, if you come to my office at the University of Pikeville now, I got about a dozen frogs up there, because people started bringing me frogs, but it gave you a name. And as I ran for governor, it was jobs, jobs, jobs. Jobs are us. And when I won and I made the inaugural speech, I talked about improving higher education in Kentucky. And when that speech was over, the staff and the press came in, where'd that come from? You didn't talk about that during your campaign. I said, well, I talked about what people want in the campaign. And I talked about what people need in my speech, and that's what I'm going to do. And so we went on, and you probably know if you remember my name, the only thing you probably remember is I did something supported higher education, and that's a big part of the book. And it was and the book goes into the details of the back room side of how it happened. We won that issue by 1 vote, 1 Republican vote in the Senate, and it was a great political battle, and I won it. If I had lost, I would not have run for governor again, because the only thing people would remember was that I tried to take the community colleges away from the University of Kentucky, and they didn't like that. And I understand why they didn't like it. But if you figure out what a community college is supposed to be, it's supposed to be unique to that community. It's supposed to prepare the workforce for that community. And it also provides the first 2 years of a bachelor's degree program, and that's good. But the workforce of the community is different from, Ashland's got a decaying industrial economy. They've got a particular need. And Bowling Green's got an exploding manufacturing economy, and that's what they need, new workers. And that's the way that you've got to get that across to the people. And we hired the consultants. I didn't know hardly anything about higher education administration. I knew how important it was, and that's all I needed to know as governor. See how important it was. And so we hired 2 or 3 different consultants, national consultants. They studied the situation for a while, and their conclusion was, well, probably the worst way that you could operate a community-based education system is through the bureaucracy of state government. And our technical schools, that's what we had. And they said the second worst way that you can operate a community-based education program is through the bureaucracy of a big university, a research university. And you got both of them. But you do have both of them, and the state controls both of them. And we talked it over with the staff, and so we came up with the program, and it gave everybody something. And made a commitment to the University of Kentucky that, and Louisville benefited from this a little bit, because we started out with that the University of Kentucky is the research university in Kentucky, and it'd be concentrated on research, and University of Louisville be a regional school like Western and Northern and Kentucky State and stuff like that. And if Charles Wethington had not fought us, that's what we would have had. But Charles Wethington, the University of Kentucky president, he was a product of the community college. I understand that, but the students wanted that prestige of attending the University of Kentucky, although they weren't attending the University of Kentucky. These community colleges are independently accredited by the accrediting agency, and they don't. Most of the things that they taught at the community colleges at the time did not transfer to the University of Kentucky. You could take an English class at a community college, and it wouldn't transfer to English 101 at UK. And of course, this faculty wanted to be the prestige of being on the University of Kentucky faculty, but they weren't on the University of Kentucky faculty. They didn't have any standing with the University of Kentucky. So, but I understood that. And most of the presidents of the community colleges were a product of Kentucky's community colleges. They didn't understand the big magnitude of what that the community colleges needed to be. And so we had to fight that battle. And let me tell you, fighting the University of Kentucky is not a lot of fun. Maybe I drank water here. My first year as governor, I won the national championship in basketball for the University of Kentucky. That's a pretty good achievement for a governor. And then the next year, we were going to bring this up to a special session in about May of 1997. I went into office in December of 95. So 96 was the first year, 97. So, I won the university was in the championship again. They were in the final championship. That first year, I came in and I was a hero. I had bet the New York. We were playing Syracuse, and I'd bet New York a bushel of Kentucky ham against the New York apple. And Governor Pataki sent me a bushel of apples down there. I took them to that first celebration at Rupp Arena. They brought the team in, and it was full. They had brought a big bus in it, and so I started throwing them apples out to the crowd. I was a hero, win a national championship. Well, let me tell you, in 97, I wasn't as quite as anxious to get into that arena then. They had hung me. If you remember, Kentucky came in second that year, so I escaped that. But I had U of L and all of the regional universities on my side. I had the State Chamber of Commerce on my side. I had the Pritchard Committee on my side, and that's an interesting story. It was just the University of Kentucky. And I almost lost it. And I had to depend on it. I got about 4 or 5 Republican Senate votes and lost 3 or 4. But that was the greatest political fight that I've ever been involved in. And but we did a lot more though. I think and most of it, very few people have any realization of what we did or they've forgotten it. And so we're about ready for questions now. So anybody's got, I can talk as long as you want me to talk. Okay. Oh, this is my chief of staff, Skipper Martin. He's from over here in Middletown. He wasn't near that white-headed when we started working together, but I wasn't this white-headed either, so.
I wish you would tell them about the property in E-Town for the electrical plant and how you saved that piece of property. I think it's a very interesting story.
Yeah, when I was governor, about a year or so into my governorship, Korean, what's that Korean automobile company?
Hyundai.
Hyundai said they were going to build a factory in the United States. And they were looking at Alabama and they were looking at Ohio and they were looking at they really weren't looking at Kentucky. And Mitch McConnell intervened with them and got them to come to Kentucky. And we brought them to Kentucky and that property down at E-Town, a little bit south of E-Town, is about 1,800 acres. It's on the left side of the interstate coming this way. It's on the left side. And on the other side of the property is the C&O Railroad coming into Louisville. And then on each side of that property, there's interchanges. It's a perfect place. You just don't find that kind of property too much in Kentucky, close to a population center where they can get the kinds of workers that they needed. And we bought that sucker. We bought that piece of property for about $15 to $18 million, if I remember correctly. And but we didn't get Hyundai. And I said, there'll be something come along in the future that will need that property, and we need to. So we did that. We cut a deal with the people at Elizabethtown and Warren, and they told them not to divide that up. Don't sell it off in pieces. Keep it together, because there's not another piece of property like that in Kentucky. And they held it for 20 years. And finally, just last year, they got the battery factory that's sitting there. And if you go down the interstate, you can see it over on the right. It's a big building, and they're going to build another just like it. So the Kentucky will be the largest manufacturer of batteries for automobiles in the world. That's where you've got to invest in the future, and that's what Kentucky needs to do.
Well, Governor Patton,
Hello.
Neville Blakemore, good to see you again, sir.
Good to see you again.
So I agree with your assessment, about the regional airport and it not happening. I'm curious your take on the Constitution's limitation of local option, and this is something that Mayor Fisher has raised in the past. And what I'm getting at is, why has Kentucky been left behind again and again and again? And I think the division that you reference is a good example. But the Constitution from 1894 prevents the General Assembly from giving any city in Kentucky a local option sales tax. And it stymies us and it prevents us from investing in the local communities. And I've come to believe that that's a top 3 issue that prevents Kentucky or any city in Kentucky from really prospering and growing. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Are you familiar with the issue? Well,
I think that to be prosperous in this world, you've got to work together, and you've got to invest, and that takes money. And the prosperous states in this country are the high tax states. You notice that? New York, Boston, Massachusetts, California. In this world, you have to work together and you got to do things in common, and that's going to cost money. And of course, most people don't want to pay any more taxes than they have to, but most people realize that they have to have government. And if you're in Montana, you don't need much government. But in Kentucky, you need a lot more government than we got. We're in the center of the eastern United States, the absolute center. Got 4 big interstates that come and go to us. You can't get from Canada to Florida without going through Kentucky. So you need to invest, and yet we were one of the last states in the state to get our interstate road system completed, and we're still working on it. So I'm not sure exactly what the question was. I forgot that, but was wet dry? Was wet dry in that question? Okay, local option, like. Yeah. Well, I was a county judge for 10 years, so I recognize how restricted local governments are with the amount of money that you have to spend. And in Pike County, Pike County at that time was about 85,000 people. And about 5,000 lived in Pikeville, the only incorporated city, and about 2,000 in another little town. So about 7,000 of them lived in an incorporated area. The county was the government for most of the people. And we didn't have garbage collection. We didn't have rural water. We didn't have very much in the way of rural roads. And as a county judge, I did some pretty hard things. I passed a mandatory garbage program. That was one of the first, and that was again a big political fight. Just barely won that one after about 6 months. So government needs to do things for people, and I think today I read an article about that. There's some people talking about having a mandatory acceptance of housing vouchers for people like you've got here in Louisville. And Lexington has been talking about doing that because otherwise it results in segregation. It results, most of the people, 75% of the people that get housing vouchers are single women with children. And they can't get housing. They have to go to the very worst parts of town where they can get housing and use those vouchers. So, but there's a guy introduced a bill today to prevent local governments, including Jefferson County, from having those mandatory voucher programs for renters, for homeowners, or for landlords. That's something that really ought to be handled by the local governments. And listen, local government is probably the most inefficient, maybe even the most dishonest, but it's also the most efficient. You can get to your local government. You can get to the courthouse. You can get to the mayor's office. You can't get to the governor's office very easy. And so we, but here, I am for local people being able to decide most of those things that are truly local in origin, like the local tax rate and the local roads. You know, that if people want local roads, they're going to pay for them. And so I think I'm on your side on that.
Governor Patton, we have several people that are joining us virtually. So they have some questions that they would like me to relay to you. And one of them is a good segue to what you were just talking about. Could one way to attract talent is to make a triangle in public transportation between Louisville, Indianapolis, and Cincinnati, high-speed rail systems and cities that are walkable?
I can't hear good either. I got hearing aids in. Repeat that again. I didn't sure I got that.
So the question was around public transportation
Uh-huh.
and ways to attract talent, because you referenced that Kentucky is kind of in the center. So their question is, should they make a triangle of public transportation that would include Indianapolis, Cincinnati, and Louisville to make a high-speed rail system and more walkable cities?
And again, I think that's up to the local community to decide. It's not but the state, something, a project like that, the state would have to get involved with it, but it should be something that would get the support of the local people. Eastern Kentucky is held Kentucky back for 100 years. If you cut off Eastern Kentucky about Winchester and took the rest of the state, we would be about a middle of the road state. But Eastern Kentucky, for a variety of reasons, the mountains and coal business and lack of education, Eastern Kentucky, I don't think this is the answer to your question, but Eastern Kentucky was developed by 3 waves of immigrants that depended on labor, manual labor and very little education. The first was subsistence farming. People just moved from valley to valley. And back when you were plowing a field with a mule and one plow, you could plow those little creek bottoms up there about as well as you could those Ohio flatlands. But mechanization made subsistence farming not profitable. But it had brought a lot of people into Eastern Kentucky. The second wave after the Civil War was the Appalachian hardwoods, in demand all over the world. And you could, in the winter, for about 20 or 25 years, they would cut those trees down, haul them to the creek with a mule, build a temporary dam in a spring, and when that dam got about 10 or 12 feet high, the water got that high, they'd roll them logs into that water in that pond, they'd blow out that dam, and those logs would float down the Big Sandy River all the way to Catlettsburg, Kentucky. We're on the Ohio. At one time, Catlettsburg, Kentucky was the largest port in the United States based on tonnage, because of all those logs that were coming out of Kentucky and West Virginia. The Tug River in West Virginia and the Big Sandy River in Kentucky. So where did that question start, or where did it go? But
Well,
you
you're talking about the immigrant.
I'm going to tell one story. At one time during I decided that we couldn't get factories in Eastern Kentucky, and we had to get the workers down to Lexington. So I was going to have a monorail in the middle of the Mountain Parkway at 65 from Pikeville to Lexington, about Paris Pike Exchange there. One from Ashland into Lexington, and one from Harlan County into Lexington, and then have 6 trains going out from there to Winchester and Frankfort and Danville and counties like that. Now that I didn't go very far, but that's the kind of thinking that I do. But transportation, it's a real issue because we're such a big country, and we've got so much rural, and we got so much infrastructure based on automobile transportation, which they don't have. Europe is much more compact, and the trains are much more usable there. And of course, Japan's the same thing. But there's a place for that kind of, I would think that there's a place for that kind of transport, but it would have to have the state help, but it has to originate in the communities. Did that come anywhere close to that question?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
All right.
Here's another question from George Humphreys. Larry Forgy claimed that he lost the election to you because Senator McConnell did not work for his election. Do you agree?
Absolutely not true. I had a good working relationship with Senator McConnell. I didn't agree with hardly any of his politics at all. But when it was a Kentucky issue in Washington, we got a lot more help out of him than we did Jim Bunning, who was the other senator. But no, there's no truth to that whatsoever. We had a good working relationship with Senator McConnell, but no agreement.
Any other questions from you all? Feel free. Come on up.
Hey, Governor, thanks for being here. It's Greg Fisher. Politics. Okay, what is going on in our country right now? We're so polarized and tribalized. And how do you've been following politics for a long time. You've been following politics for a long time. So what do you make of the tribalization in America right now? We can't agree on anything. Are we at an inflection point? Is it going to get better or is it going to get worse?
Well, I have been involved in politics for a long time. His first election was about 1980 or 81. But back then, it is not reasonable to think that all Democrats would have the same position on an issue, and all Republicans would have had the opposite of that. Now, when I was in Frankfurt the first term, it wasn't that way. Every issue that we promoted, and we would generally have 10 or 15 issues per session, I got Republican support, and I didn't get all Democrats. You could sell the legislators then based on the merits. Well, if you remember, or if you don't remember, in the second term, David Williams got 2 Democrats to switch to Republicans, which gave them a 1-vote majority in the Senate. And if you know much about politics, you want to be in the majority, because the majority gets to, as you're seeing in Washington right now, the majority gets to decide what issues come up for a vote. That's wrong, but that's the way it is. It'd be the same if it was Democrats. And so it's just a messed up system. It's been that way in Washington for many, many years. It's only been that way in Kentucky since about 1999 or 2000. But that first term of mine, that last term of mine, the Republicans had to learn how to gum it up, all that bail. And so we got most of the things. For one thing, we had already gotten most of the pieces of legislation we wanted. Now, our second term, I think the 2 terms are a good idea. In Kentucky, at least, it's going to take you 2 terms to get your programs enacted. And then you've got to get them adopted. It's governors, I say governors can proclaim and legislators can legislate, but people are going to do the work. You got to have boots on the ground. And that's what you need in that second term. So we pretty well had our program enacted, and we were pretty well free to implement them. And I think I think we got every major issue that we promoted, we got enacted in some way, maybe modified some, but except the tax reform. And Kentucky's got a very bad tax system. And of course, there's a lot of people in Kentucky don't want to pay taxes. That's wrong. That's wrong. You have to pay for government, and you need government in this modern, complicated society. I say, if you live in Montana, you don't need a lot of government, but if you live in Kentucky, you do. Did I come anywhere close to that one? My eyes water and my nose runs, so you just have to, and I'm 86 years old, so I'm been around a long time.
Governor, other than reading your book, what books would you recommend us in Louisville, who don't know much about Eastern Kentucky, to learn more about the history of Eastern Kentucky and its future now? Books. What books would you recommend for us in Louisville who don't know that much about Eastern Kentucky? Would you recommend for us to look for and read? Okay, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
When we sold our company in 1940, in 1980, 88 or something like that. We had about 200 employees and mined about 1 billion tons a year. So we did pretty good. But that the first 10 years was manual labor. So look, I don't exactly know. Harry Caudle's book, Night Comes to the Cumberland, is one that I remember. And I've got a pretty good sized library, but most of it is on national issues. Now I read national issues right now. Not that I have any influence nationally, but I just finished up a book on Schwarzkopf, and I've done Colin Powell, and I've done Mitt Romney, and I've done 2 or 3 more, and I'm going to get one on Nikki Haley. I mean, I'm fascinated. I'm not going to vote for her, but I'm going to learn something about her in case she happens to get there. And I've read 3 or 4 on the Donald, and I ain't going to vote for the Donald either. So, I think if you researched it a little bit, there are several books on Eastern Kentucky, but probably not enough.
I'm happy that you mentioned Harry Caudle's book, Night Comes to the Cumberlands. It's one I've actually read. Another one I read is J.D. Vance's book, more recent, about the decline of Kentucky and Southern Ohio because of all the Kentuckians who moved up to Ohio. I don't like that book. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I don't either. You talking about that guy that's a senator in Ohio now? That is not an accurate portrayal of the people of Eastern Kentucky. If you've read that book, it's not an accurate portrayal. They're good people. Too many of them still don't understand the importance of education because of what I told you earlier. They're poor because they're not educated, but because they're not educated, they don't really understand that. I worked with a lot of people that had maybe an 8th grade education, smart people that can learn, but they never did realize their greatest potential. That's the reason I took on education as governor. Actually, the first thing we did for education as governor was to prevent CARA from being repealed. If you remember that at all, in 96, the session, CARA was enacted in 1990, and it was revolutionary. It was the most progressive educational reform in the United States. By 94, 95, it asked the teachers to completely relearn what they were doing. It made a tremendous demand on the teachers. And it was a different concept. And it was different than the parents had been exposed to. And they got to question it. So there was a tremendous movement to, if you remember the governor's race, Larry Forgy promised to repeal CARA. They beat him. They beat him. I promised to fix CARA. Now, I don't know what the difference of repeal and fix was, but I didn't know what fix was, but I knew it sounded better. It would be better than to repeal. And there was a business group that got behind that was instrumental in getting CARA passed. It was John Hall of Fashion Oil and the UPS fella and David Jones of Humana. Those three business leaders got the business community in Kentucky to put up about $200,000 to advertise and promote CARA. They weren't promoting me, but they was on the same side I was on. And if you remember, the 95 election for governor was a government financed campaign. There were spending limits. You could only spend $1.8 million in each election, and you had to raise $600,000 of that at $500 a pop, and before that you could get $4,000 for a candidate, and then the state, but you had to, it would give you the $1.2 million, but that's all you could spend, and that's the reason Skipper Martin worked for free. And we had everybody. Is Kevin Goldsmith ever make it here tonight? Kevin, are you back there? Yeah, Kevin worked for us in that campaign. Good to see you, young man. He was our representative in Washington for 8 years, and he's a fine young man, and I'm very fond of him. And he, I forgot where I was going, but
Well, it was the honor of my life. And to this day, all the people that we worked with in DC on the big issues, which you led, the transportation bill in 1997, T21, which raised the amount of transportation infrastructure funding, and more for Kentucky. You always told me, let's start what's good for Kentucky and go from there.
yeah,
You said that over and over as we traveled, and then you also led in 2003 the largest bipartisan effort among governors for fiscal relief for states and for cities and counties. So you're someone that I hear from a lot of folks, the executive directors of associations and others, just how you had the ability to be bipartisan and work with these folks to accomplish great things. And I appreciate the opportunity.
well, I appreciate you, Kevin. Good to see you again. And that reminds me of something. I told you that the day after the election, Skipper came up to the lieutenant governor's mansion, and we said, what are we going to do now? And we came up with I asked Governor Brown how he had managed to get the kind of people he got in his administration. And he said, I got W.T. Young in Lexington, and when I got him in my cabinet secretary, that gave a signal of the kind of people I was looking for, and that allowed other business people to come in. So we came up with Margaret Green, who was the head of Bell South here in Kentucky, and here in Louisville, and somebody came up with the idea to try to get her to be Secretary of the Cabinet. And the Secretary of the Cabinet is the person that runs this government day to day and sort of filters stuff that really needs to come to the governor. And we got her to come to Frankfort. She was head of Bell South in Kentucky and had a great future in a young woman, great future in Bell South. And we made a proposition to her for her to come and help us put together a business-oriented administration for cabinet secretaries. And she thought, oh, she said, you know, I'm sort of ready for a change. I'll do that for a year. And then she was making about $300,000 a year then, and we offered to pay her $80,000. And so I'm a pretty persuasive person at time. And so she said, I promised her she could pick the cabinet of administrators, good administrators. And she said, okay, but you're gonna let it do it my way. So she went to Humana and got Robert Harrar, which was Humana's chief headhunter. And she went to Ashland Oil and got their chief headhunter. And the three of them picked up, we screened out the applications that we had. We made it known that we wanted applications for those jobs. And we had about 120 that our staff, Skipper and those people, thought might be the kind of people we were looking for. And so we turned that 120 over to that group of three, and they interviewed every one of them. They did the resumes of all of them, and they picked 40. And they invited them to come to Frankfurt in the basement of the lieutenant governor's mansion, the three of them, and for 5 days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, they invited one person an hour for 8 hours a day. That was 40 people that they invited to come in for an interview. And Skipper and me and Melissa Forsyth and a couple more, Judy, we just sat and watched. We did not take part in that. And they made recommendations for 12 of those 40. They recommended 12 of them for cabinet positions. And I asked them, and all of them but one accepted. And that changed the whole tenor of my administration. There was some Republicans were shocked when we got all that list. I said, we better make sure these aren't all Republicans. I can't have more Republicans than I do Democrats in this administration. And we ended up with, there was 2 that I'd already picked out. We had 7 Democrats and 6 Republicans, I think. And one of the Republicans was Margaret Handmaker. I don't know if you ever heard of Margaret Handmaker, but she was, Bill, what was the lawyer for Forgy? Forgy's lawyer in the race, he worked for free for Forgy, was her husband, but he had a different name than she did. But we found that out. We done asked her, and we said, well, let's just see what she does. She was one of the best secretaries that we had. And with 5 or 6 Republicans in your cabinet, that sort of changes the dynamics. With the Democrats, some of them didn't like that, and with the Republicans. And so when it came down to re-election in 99, I virtually had no Republican opponent. It was a lady that had absolutely, well, Mitch McConnell and David, what was it, said they voted for me. So you can tell she wasn't a strong Republican. Now, what was the question over here? Was that?
No question. We just want to thank you so much for being here tonight. And if you'd like to purchase a book, we will have book sales and signing here. So join me in thanking Governor Patton.
Well, again, thank you all. Enjoyed it.